We are at Schloss Leopoldskron, the home of the Salzburg Global Seminar. If you look across the lake, you will see a mountain, the Untersberg. And in a short while, my guest is going to be banished indefinitely, possibly forever, at the top of the Untersberg. She has been taking part in the American Studies program. This is an annual program, and the theme this year is Great American Literature. Justine Talley, you're a professor of American literature, but not in the United States.
No, ma'am.
But you come from the United States.
I do.
And you teach in Spain.
Yes, I do.
So what took you from the American South to Spain?
It was to the Spanish South,
To
yes,
the Spanish South.
Very South. One of those great fateful decisions one makes at a very early age. Under the heavy influence of my mother, I knew that I wanted to study foreign languages. I knew that I wanted to do the junior year abroad program in Europe. It was a great attraction for me. And at the high school level, when I was age 15, I could choose French or I could choose Spanish. And it turns out that the French teacher did not have a very good reputation at all, but the Spanish teacher was cracker. She was absolutely excellent. And under the influence of my mother, I probably would have gone to French, but my mother said, always study with the best teacher. It doesn't matter what you study with the best teacher. So I studied Spanish. So when I got to college, I continued to major in Spanish and Spanish literature and Spanish American literature, and I went junior year to Madrid, fell in love with the country and in love with my husband, my would-be husband at that point. Went back to the United States to New Orleans, where I finished my degree, moved back to Spain, and I've been there ever since. I lived for 3 years in Madrid teaching at the Complutense, and then because my husband was from the Canary Islands, he wanted to move back to Tenerife, because people from islands always want to go back to their island. So that's why the island thing was very good.
So I'm sorry that you're going to be abandoned to the top of a mountain, but...
I grew up at the end of the Appalachian Mountains in North Alabama. So being on the top of the mountain with the wind and the stars and the thing is kind of homey. It's not a bad place to be banished if I have to be banished.
So you will probably do quite well. And you will be able to have with you 3 books, 3 works of great American literature. So what is your first book?
May I give you a prelude when I talk about the 3 books?
I hope you will.
Because this is such a difficult decision. I would like to choose one from 3 different major eras of American literature. One from the Great Renaissance period in the mid-19th century, one from the modernist period in the 1920s, and one from the postmodernist period. This is the 1990s. So I start with Moby Dick because, as my husband says, it's a whale of a book. and it's got so many pieces of information and so much to read and reread, and it's been discussed, and so many theories about who the white whale is. And I want to reread it in the context of Toni Morrison's literary criticism, in which she rereads the figure of Ahab as a tragic figure who was trying to fight off a fairly new concept of that time, and it was the concept of whiteness. It is the time in American literature, according to Toni Morrison, in which the American identity is being consolidated and whiteness becomes associated with being American. So she reads Ahab as a tragic figure who was a lonely fighter trying to bring down the great white whale, which was this concept of whiteness. I find that fascinating, and a total rereading of a book that's 150 years old, 160 years old actually.
Perhaps we should hear a little bit of the great work.
Okay, I'll try. I'm not Melville, but and he has long sentences, but I will try. I would like to read from chapter 1, which he entitles Loomings, because it's so famous and because it sets out so many important things of what will happen in the 600 pages that follow. Okay. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how many precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It's a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hops get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to the sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing really surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, sometime or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings toward the ocean with me.
Well, you have Moby Dick. What is your second choice?
My second choice, brings me to the modern stage in the 1920s, and because I'm from the South, and also because I'm an adept of Toni Morrison, and she's very much engaged with Faulkner as well, I chose a novel from Faulkner. It was difficult, but I did choose The Sound and the Fury because, again, it's 4 different voices. Faulkner himself considered it to be his great failure because his premise is quite difficult, but the language is quite complicated in 4 very different ways, and so every time you read it, you read something else that you missed the first time around. And since I'm going to be abandoned with only 3 books that I will have to read several times, depending how long you're going to abandon me, I wanted something that was challenging and something that was always interesting to me, anyway.
So should we hear the voice of Faulkner now?
We can try. Faulkner's heavy going too. But I took this not from Benji's chapter. Benji is the first chapter in that one, and he is retarded. So he has the mind of a 3-year-old, and his fascinating descriptions, but you have to understand that what he's describing is in the words of what a 3-year-old might have understood. And that's so complicated that it started my paragraph they've taken is from Quentin, the second chapter. It's entitled June 2nd, 1910, and it's the day Quentin is to commit suicide. It's heavy duty as well. Okay. When the shadow of the sash appeared on the curtains, it was between 7 and 8 o'clock, and then I was in time again, hearing the watch. It was grandfather's, and when father gave it to me, he said, "I give to you the mausoleum of all hope and desire. It's rather excruciatingly apt that you will use it to gain the reductio absurdum of all human experience, which can fit your individual needs no better than it fitted his or his father's. I give it to you, not that you may remember time, but that you might forget it now and then for a moment, and not spend all your breath trying to conquer it. Because no battle is ever won," he said. "They're not even fought. The field only reveals to man his own folly and despair, and victory is an illusion of philosophers and fools." Powerful stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's just,
So you've got 2
heavy
greats of American literature. So now are we going to move on to the lighter stuff?
The most fun.
And that is?
Toni Morrison's jazz.
Well, you've written a lot about Toni Morrison
Yes, I
yourself,
have.
haven't you?
You're totally devoted to Toni
Toni Morrison expert.
I don't like that word. I don't think anybody's a
sorry.
Toni Morrison expert. I'm a scholar of Toni Morrison. I'm an adept. I adore her work, her thinking. I think she's one of the greatest living minds in the United States, definitely, possibly in the world, and I follow her avidly, and I love what she does. I chose jazz. Sometimes I think that Beloved is the great American novel, but I thought, you know, if I'm alone for a long time, I want something that sounds good, that I can pace and recite and enjoy and listen to the music of the language. And I chose this one because she actually favors this novel for precisely the same reasons. She likes the music of the words. It's not about the story. As a matter of fact, I'd like to read the excerpt, which is the very beginning of the novel, and it tells you the entire story.
Please.
It's the story of the novel, but it's the lovely words that she uses. Okay, I have to get into, excuse me.
Get into the rhythm of it.
Yes, it's very rhythmic. And it starts with a sound. So it's very much about sound. Okay. Chapter 1 from Jazz. I know that woman. She used to live with a flock of birds on Lenox Avenue. Know her husband, too. He fell for an 18-year-old girl with one of those deep-down spooky loves that made him so sad and happy, he shot her just to keep the feeling going. When the woman, her name is Violet, went to the funeral to see the girl and to cut her dead face, they threw her to the floor and out of the church. She ran then through all that snow, and when she got back to her apartment, she took the birds from their cages and set them out the windows to freeze or fly, including the parrot that said, "I love you." The snow she ran through was so windswept, she left no footprints in it. So for a time, nobody knew exactly where on Lenox Avenue she lived. But like me, they knew who she was, who she had to be, because they knew that her husband, Joe Trace, was the one who shot the girl. There was never anyone to prosecute him because nobody actually saw him do it. And the dead girl's aunt didn't want to throw money to helpless lawyers or laughing cops when she knew the expense wouldn't improve anything. Besides, she found out that the man who killed her niece cried all day. And for him and for Violet, that is as bad as jail.
I'm so sorry that I can't allow you to have more than 3 books because I'm really enjoying hearing the voices of your authors in your voice. It's wonderful. But sadly, that's your 3 books. And Justine, thank you so much for being with us on the Untersberg.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is great fun.